So today we are going to be animating the hold triangle animation from The Last of Us Part 2. And we're going to be using a bunch of simple tools like the pen tool, ellipse tool, and so on from Illustrator to actually design it. We'll copy that and then paste it into After Effects as shape layers, where we'll do, again, simple animations of opacity and translation and so on to fade it in, and then a radial wipe effect to get that indentation in the top of the circle where the triangle grows out. And once all that's good to go, we will use trim paths to animate those twirling arms that rotate around the circle. And once those are done, we'll use a Gaussian blur on a shape path to get that light sheen that we see rotating around at the beginning. And then we'll fade it all out and it'll be good to go. And if you want my project files, feel free to download those. I got them in the link in the description, so feel free to check those out. So let's go ahead and hop into Illustrator. So for this part, what we're going to be doing is illustrating our stuff in Illustrator and then copying those paths into After Effects in shape layers. And the reason for that is illustrating in Illustrator is much easier than illustrating in After Effects. It's just a painful experience every time I got to use the pen tool in there. So generally I try to avoid it. So we'll just try to keep things in Illustrator as much as we can. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and make a new document. The size doesn't matter because we're going to be changing the size of the artboard anyway, because we're not actually exporting anything from Illustrator. We're just making stuff and then copying it and pasting it into After Effects. And so once this actually loads, I will zoom out and grab the artboard tool, scale this up like I mentioned so that we just have a big space to work in. And I'll turn on a couple things. So I want to show the grid and I want to snap to that grid, but I want to turn off snap to pixel because no one likes snap to pixel. And just to show you, so now if I click the pen tool or whatever, I could just start clicking away and everything is snapping to a point. So I'll delete that, and I already have the reference image prepared, so I'll drag this over. We'll be making this. And so it's just a bunch of circles, pretty simple shape. But to get started, what we'll actually do is make a square as like a pseudo artboard. So I want this to be 1080 wide and high, so that and because that's the size of the comp in After Effects we'll be doing. So just kind of simulate our little comp. I'll get rid of the fill and I'll try to center it to one of these intersections. That's good, and then I'll align this reference to it vertically. Scoot that over. So now I'll just start making some circles with it. So with the ellipse tool, I'll drag, that's not centered. I'll drag a circle from the center, and I already did the math on this, so you're welcome. The outer ring, because we want a single path with a stroke, not two paths making like this compound shape, but we want this to be 9.25 inches diameter. Oh, which is 666 pixels, our lucky day. So I will select that and give it a stroke of 54 pixels. And for the inner button, and I'll call it the button just because even though it is technically a triangle, we actually do have a triangle here. So just to kind of keep things together. Okay, anyway. Control-C, Control-F to duplicate that and paste it in place. I will scale that down. I'll get rid of the fill, get rid of the stroke and give it a fill. And this one, I did the numbers on, and it is 7.25 inches wide. So that's looking good. I will grab the Polygon Tool for the triangle. I'll ask for a three-sided triangle with a height of 3.625 inches. Oh, not pixels, inches. And I'll center that to the circle. I will give it a normal color so I can see it, but you'll notice it looks off-centered because it's a lopsided shape. So we'll try to optically align this. So if I hit Control-Y for the wireframe mode, I'll just scoot it up, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe, to get it in a good spot. Yeah, that works for me. So that's good to go. Then for the inner triangle, what I'll do is get rid of this fill, give it a stroke of 0.625 inches, and set that stroke direction to inside. I'll expand that, object expand appearance, and that's looking good. For the top triangle here, what I'll do is just hit the pen tool and start clicking away because we already got the snapping to grid on, so maybe there. I'll drag it over to see if that lines up. Yeah, it works for me. We're not going to be illustrating the actual cut into the circle because that's purely animated. The geometry itself doesn't have any slits into it. And yeah, that's it. Actually, one other thing I could, right now, the button is two separate pieces just kind of sitting above each other. So what I'll do is I'll select this circle and this triangle, just drag a duplicate, and I will punch out this triangle. So now we have a solid shape. And this is kind of why I work this way with a big artboard, is I can just keep doing this stuff and throwing excess pieces around without worrying about an artboard. But anyway, I will go ahead and hop into After Effects now. I was looking at the original animation earlier so you can see how it's done. Anyway, I will make a new comp, 1080 by 1080 like I mentioned. I would recommend 30 frames a second, but whatever. And same thing with 15 seconds. Doesn't necessarily matter, but whatever. So with that made, I'll actually rename this to Hold Triangle. And I want to give this a background, so I'll say Layer, New, Solid, Black, and voila, I'll rename this to Background because we are so organized. And now for the actual object. So we'll hop back into Illustrator and we'll be jumping back and forth. So I'll start with this ring. I'll Control C to copy it. Go into After Effects, right click, New, Shape Layer, and give this shape layer a path. And in that path, I will paste our circle and give this a stroke 2. Just like before, it'll be 54 points. It's looking good. So now for the inner button, what we'll do is we'll take this shape because we want a compound path. We don't want two separate things. So we want to select this shape, Control C, and I'll close this. Just like before, New Shape Layer, then add a path onto that. And in that path, I will paste my thing. But unlike before, this is not just one path, this is 3. And so the problem with that is After Effects freaks out and pastes the other 2 as masks, which is pretty annoying, but we could work around it. So what we'll do is we'll actually, just like we did earlier, we'll add a path, actually add 2 more paths, so we have 3 total. I'll open those, and these mask paths, I'll just individually copy them and then go into the paths we just created and paste them. So we did that pink one, I'll delete it. Now I'll do the blue one, copy it and paste it into path 3. I'll delete those masks. So now you can see they're all the same color because it's all one shape. And so now I will add a fill and fingers crossed, yes. So I'll change that fill color to white. And that's looking good. So with that good to go, I'll actually move on to the top triangle. So I will copy it, and like you'll probably notice the color in Illustrator doesn't matter because it changes in After Effects. So I will copy this and go into After Effects. Actually, we should start renaming our stuff. So this is ring. This is button. Oh, button. Oh, we should probably change color too. So I'll change button to yellow. How about that? Then I will do just like before, a new shape layer, add a path, and in that path, paste our thing. But unlike before, whereas everything was centered, the top triangle is not centered. And what you'll notice is if we go to the position, it's 540, 540. So kind of like a lesson in After Effects coordinates, this top left is 0. So if we go to the on the x-axis, so it'd be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on until 540, and then 1080, and same thing down, 540 right here in the middle, then 1080. And so what we'll do is, what I usually like to do is measure in Illustrator the exact dimensions. So if we go back into After Effects, we'll see that it is measuring, when it says, oh, the position is 540 by 440, it's specifically mentioning or referencing the height or the center point of it right here. So we're going to measure that. So if I go into Illustrator, and I'll just take a rectangle, that's what I usually like to measure with. So I'll go from the top and I'll drag until I find that center of the, actually let me change this color so you can see it easy. We'll make it a blue. So just like before, from the top of this pseudo artboard, I'll drag down until I can find that intersect center, whatever. And you'll notice if I select it, 193.5 pixels high is this rectangle. So now if I went into After Effects again and said the position is 193.5, you'll notice it's exactly where I want it. We have to do some clown math of, oh, looks fucking close enough, you know? So I like to do it that way so that it's exact. And in this instance, we probably could have just eyeballed it, but there's going to be stuff in the future where it's helpful to have the exact number like that. And we will give that a fill, just like before. The fill is going to be white. And I'll rename this to top triangle. Give that, let's say this will be green. And that is that. So in this part, we'll do just pretty simple animations, position, scale, and opacity to fade this button in. And then we'll use a radial wipe to actually open up the ring on the top. And once all that's good to go, we will use the same tools just backwards to shrink it and close it up like the button's being clicked. So I'll go ahead and start animating it by going forward one frame, and I want to mark the beginning. Go forward after that a little, and that was with B, then mark the end with N. And so now we got a little section to work in, and I'll start everything at 1 second in. And I'll start with the ring, so I'll hit S for scale, T for opacity, transparency, whatever, then U to bring them both up. And with that, everything here is going to be animated in intervals of 5. So in this case, the end point is going to be for 10 frames. So I'll mark or key both of those again and then go back to the original frame, set the opacity to 0, scale to 0. So it should look like that, simple enough. And most of the opacities here are going to be linear, so no easing, whereas these other things tend to be some sort of interpolation. So I will put on this one a ease in and exaggerate that handle. So it should look like that. And that's the scale, that is. And then after that, what I'll do is go to 105, so 5 seconds off. And I'll start with the button. So the button, I will do the same thing with the scale, opacity, and then U to bring them both up. I'll go forward 10 frames and hit them again, and then go back to set them to 0% opacity and 0% scale. But in this case, I noticed in the original animation, both of them are interpolated. So I'll select them both, and then actually I'll just select the opacity for the second. And the opacity is going to be eased out and exaggerated, whereas the scale is eased in. So that should look like that. And next I will go to 105 again, and we'll work on the top triangle. So just like before, I want to key the scale, the opacity, but this time I also want to key the position. So with all of those, I'll bring up EU and go forward 10 frames, key the opacity, but I want to key the scale and the position another 5 frames after. to kind of offset it a bit. So I'll hit the scale and the position. Both of these are going to be eased in rather. So I will select the, oh, I actually didn't even set the beginning. So the opacity in the beginning has got to be 0, scale is going to be 0, and then for the position, I want it to slide up to its current spot. And since we did everything in inches, I'll just say slide up 1 inch, and that will be like we did before, 72 inches. So plus, or 72 pixels is 1 inch, so plus 72. So if we play that, slides up. And then, like I was kind of doing earlier, I'll select these and go to the graph editor and ease them in. Stretch out those handles, so it should look like that. So that's good to go. Next, we'll do the opening in the top of the ring, and that is going to be an effect called the Radial wipe. So I'll drag that onto the ring, close out all these other things for a minute. And with this radial wipe, so what it does is it just essentially a mask from the center radius. So you can mark the percent and then the position of that center. So you can see moving it around. And so those are the two factors I want to keyframe. And so I'll key the transition completion and the wipe center. Then I'll get out of the graph editor, and since I keyed those, I can hit U, or hit the X and close that out, but then also hit U to bring up those keys, and then I want them to start at 105, like those other things are. So if I were to bring these back up, you'll see they all line up. So anyway, I will go from 105 to 115 and key them again. And this just took a lot of trial and error to get these two looking right, because if I were to say 20%, and it's gonna, so, oh, also one thing I should probably do is if I go into the effect here, I want it to not be clockwise, I want it to be both directions. So I should have done that earlier, but and this looks too wide, even though it's got the right idea. However, at this endpoint, I want it to be not 540, but 306. And so that looks a lot better. But if we play this back, it looks kind of janky. And so I messed around with a lot of the curves and so on, but what I really think they did in the original animation was they just go back like 5 frames and then bring that initial keyframe there. So what it does, of the wipe center, so it looks like that, and that looks a lot smoother. So now we'll actually press the button in, which is pretty easy. So pretty much the same thing we just did with all those, but backwards. So I will go to 2 seconds in, and I'll start with the actual, you know what, actually, nothing in this animation has 100% opacity in the original animation. So I'll go ahead and do that. So start with the top triangle. If it looks white, it's probably like 90%. So that'll work. The button is the same case, so it goes to only 90, not 100. And then the ring itself is pretty transparent, so that'll be like 50%. So it should look like that. That works. And so we'll go to 2 seconds in, and I'll start the button being clicked in. And because the button being clicked, I want it to, like, whereas everything so far has been this like cascading offset effect with all this to kind of feel like it's all coming in, the button is this very instantaneous moment of something's activated, it's all happening. So I want it all to start at 2, not being offset and cascading and so on. So I'll start that with the button itself. I'll hit the scale and the opacity at 2. And I want it to be like an instant kind of thing. So it's all going to be, for the most part, 5 frames. Oh. As opposed to 10 or 15. Except there will be an instance of 10. But we'll get to that in a second. So I will key those again. And I want the opacity to stay the same. Actually, you know what? No, we can get rid of these opacities. We don't need those. we only need the scale. So the scale goes down to 90. So if we play that back, it looks like it shrinks. And the easing of that is eased. Let me zoom in here. That is going to be eased in. So it should look like that. Perfect. So that's good to go, and then we'll stay at 2, and I will probably go for the triangle next. So I will key all 3 of these things. So what it's going to be doing is this radial wipe is going to close like it opened, just opposite. However, in doing that, it's kind of going to squish the triangle. So I don't want it to open the same way, I don't want it to close the same way it opened. I want it to squish in rather than just appear out. So what that means is we'll go forward 5 frames. The opacity, pretty easy enough, that'll go down to 0. However, the scale, whereas before it just grew out, I want it to only squeeze in the one direction. So I'll drag this and actually just write in 0. So it should look like that and kind of gets pushed in, because it's going to get pushed in when this closes, when the ring closes. So that's good to go. And then the position, I'll go forward another 5 frames, and I kind of want it to get sent downward. So I'll actually just copy this original position and then paste it right here. So, like that. I don't need to mess with the handles here, but now for the actual radial wipe closing, I will key those both, go forward another 5 frames, key them again, and for this case, it closes, so from 20 to 0, but also, you know, I can delete that second wipe point because I just want to copy this point like we did 2 seconds ago and paste it here so that the wipe center is the center of the, let's try that again. So I'll copy this and then paste it. There we go. So now the wipe center is right there. And that looks good. And so that'll be it for this step. So in this part, we're going to be using an edited version of a shape we made in Illustrator and apply trim paths to that to shoot it around the circle and get that twirl effect. And so the first thing I want to do in order to animate those twirling paths is actually hop back into Illustrator so that I can get a better circle to work with. Because the problem is when we'll be using trim paths, and so when it grows that path, it could grow from any 4 of the points of a circle. So if I duplicated this out, it could start here and go that way, or start at this point. And so to confirm that it'll start exactly at the bottom, what I like to do is actually take this path, hit C on the keyboard, and split this anchor point. So if I drag this out, you'll see it's now 2 points. So now After Effects knows for a fact that it starts at one of these 2 points. So that makes it a lot easier for us. So I'll Control C to copy that, hop back into After Effects, and like we did before, I'll right click New Shape Layer, and in that shape layer add a path, and in that path I will paste our circle we just made. And so you'll see it right there. I'll rename this to Twirl and give this like a fuchsia so you can see it. So that's perfect. And I'll add a stroke. So just like before, it'll be 54 points, but the opacity is a bit weird, so I think 100% is a lot. I'll say 75 maybe. Yeah, I think that works. So that's good to go. And now what I want to do is actually add the trim path. So I will open that up and add trim paths. And so you'll be able to see it here. If I drag this start out, it's moving along. So it's just currently not at the right spot. So I'll drag it all the way to 100%. So what we'll be keyframing is it starts like this and then grows out. And then when it hits this point, in order to get it to move around the circle, I tried a few different things, and I found the best way to get this effect is to use the offset here. So it gets to this point, and then I will keyframe a rotation of it until this will be a bit of math, but it has to move up at the same rate, and then it'll rotate one loop around, and then it'll go to the top And then that's like the final point where now it just goes, and then the whole thing fills at the bottom. So that'll be the effect we're going for. But to do that, what I'll do is actually just set this back to 0. And let's just keyframe all 3 of these things wherever, so that if we hit U, we can just see those and it'll be a lot easier to manage. I'll hit U on top triangle just so we can see it. And so what we did earlier was at 2 frames, that's the player hits the button. And so now things are activating. And then at 2:05, now things are closed. And that's the perfect window for us to start this twirl. So we'll move these frames to 2:05. And so I'll actually change this 80% to 100 so that it's empty. And then what it'll do is we'll go forward 10 frames like we've been doing, and then I'll say from 100% on start to 80. So it should look like that. Problem is it stops. And really for this next part, you really just have to do a bit of math, because you're thinking in 10 frames, it goes 20%. And so you got to do the math on, in order to get the exact point, in order for it to end up exactly where you want it. So I figured out that at 425, actually, let me move this offset here. So if I go forward to the point, actually, a bit more forward. So if I go to 425, then it should be one whole loop and then 144 degrees. So I'll say -1, then -144. So it perfectly ends up there. And so what you'll notice is if I zoom out, I'll bring that in a little bit more. And so when this starts going, it's moving, it grows, and then at the same constant rate, it goes around the circle, because I don't want it to either grow super fast and then awkwardly slow down, or the other way around. So you really just have to do the math on that one. And so then it just goes around the circle and then stops at the top. And so what I want it to do after it hits the top is I want this point to zoom, to ease, out probably, all the way around to here. And then I want this point to shoot over to here. And so what I'll do is, I actually don't need this keyframe over here, so I'll just drag it there, and then I'll key the start to right here at, 425. I'll go forward 10 frames, and then I will hit the start in the end. I don't need to hit the offset. So I will do the start. It is going to end up at a clean 15 degrees, so that goes to 15, and then the end, if I had to guess, 75? 65. So that'll go to 65 degrees, and so it'll cleanly shoot around. And obviously that has to be eased, so we will select those points and ease those in. Now, actually, what I want to do too is the opposite for the easing out for the beginning. So it should look something like that. It kind of shoots out and then zooms around. The problem with that is it's still a bit rough. So the way I figured to do it is, on this case, we'll break our 5-second interval. So I'll select all these keyframes, go to the graph editor. And so this is like a visualization of the speed of it. And so this right here is the constant speed of it going around the circle. So what I want to do is, I'll start with the beginning here. I'll zoom in and I'll just drag this point around until the peak of it matches more or less this. So let me show you what I mean. If I drag this out, no, that's too far. I'll hold shift to keep it locked. And yeah, let's say right here. So this is a pretty good frame for it to, it shoots up and then pretty much stays at the same rate. And then I'll do the same thing other side. So I will grab, I want to grab the orange one. So that, nope, hang on. What is orange? Orange is a start. So Let me move that out for a second just so I can see it all. So I'm going to scoot that out. This is going to be moved fairly a lot, but it'll work. So let me keep going. Geez, I might have to zoom out for this. Okay, perfect. What does that end up being? 209? No. What is that? 605. Or 603. You know what? I think I'll move it to 605 just to make it a nice. Yeah. And then because we did the 5 earlier, so I feel like I might as well. But I'll move the pink in that same spot. So now if we play it back, it just shoots out and then... Oh, actually, I gotta... Hang on. Let me zoom out and then move that endpoint. Zoom out all the way. Hang on. Please stand by. So it opens up, shoots out, and then shoots around. So that's perfect. And so now for a final step on that, what we'll do is we'll just duplicate it, Control D. Actually, I probably should have called this Twirl 01. I'll call this Twirl 02. And then I'll rotate this one, it doesn't have to be keyed, to 180 degrees. So now, if let's just see all the keyframes. Hang on, everything. So we can see how everything's working, and then if I played it back, shoots out, and shoots around. Perfect. And then that'll be the point where everything starts to close down. But for now, that is perfect. So in this part, we'll be doing pretty much the same thing, copying shapes from Illustrator, and then in this case, we're just going to put a blur on one of them to get that sheen, and then the one that goes from the top of the circle and kind of goes clockwise around it. It's a very subtle thing, but it's something we'll go ahead and add. And then the actual scaling downward. Simple enough stuff we've already done, but yeah, we'll just finish off this animation and then it'll be good to go. So I'll go ahead and go back to the beginning, and to get that sheen, what I'm actually going to do is go into Illustrator, and I kind of want to recycle a shape here, so I will grab this original circle that we use, copy it, and then in After Effects, let me close everything just so we are organized somewhat so I can see what I'm doing. I'll make a new shape layer just like we did 100 times. I'll call this sheen and make it, let's say, orange, and I will add a path, paste that path that we have so it's clearly the same shape, and I will add a fill of white. And for this, I want to actually give it a Gaussian blur. So I'll type Gaussian blur and in my effects, and so I'll drag that down onto my sheen. And let's say, I think it was 200 worked well. Yeah. So I'll close this down. And what I'll actually do is move it down. So like before, whereas I kind of didn't want to eyeball stuff and would rather go for measurements, I don't really feel like I need to do that here since it's a blurred shape that you literally wouldn't be able to tell otherwise. And so what I'll do is I want it aligned to the bottom of this circle. So I'll drag it down till we're about there. So that's good to go. And then actually I should probably, I want it to go from the top to the bottom. So I'll keep it there because there's no reference point at the... You know what? Screw it. We're going to the top. So I'll go to the top and then move that down till about there. So then I want it to start rotating at the very beginning. So at 1. I should probably hit B to bring that back up. So what I'll do is, see, everything hasn't come in yet, so it's kind of weird to see. But anyway, so I want this to rotate 1 around the center. So what I'll do is I'll zoom out, grab, what is this tool? The Y tool. Grab this center anchor point, and holding Control, if I go to the center, you'll see it would snap to the center. I'll let go. And so now if I hit R for rotate, it rotates around that point. And so with that set, I will key the rotation, and I think I'll go about 210 in my timeline, because let me look at all the other keyframes. Yeah, I'm gonna go to 210 in the timeline, and then I will bring it 180 degrees. Does that, might go in the wrong direction? No, that's good. So 180 degrees, it moves. Let me close all these again because it's kind of confusing. And so yeah, that's good to go. I then want it to disappear at the end. So what I'll do is I'll just go to that 210 point, go back 5 frames, key the opacity, go forward 10, key it again, but I want to go to 0. And this is going to be such a small thing that the easing and stuff doesn't matter. But so it goes up, and then there we go. But I only want it to be visible on this outer ring. So what I'll do is I'll drag it down underneath the ring and set its mode to, oh, not that, the track matte mode to alpha matte. And so you can see it, but clearly it hid the ring itself. So we'll just bring the ring back. And so if we play that back, you'll see it's a very subtle effect, but it's there. And it's there in the original animation, so I figured, fuck it, I'll make it. So let me actually hit the N key so you can see it on a loop. So you can see a very subtle glisten there. So, and it does add a level of polish to it. But anyway, so now for the actual fade out of everything. So things end at like 6:05, I think was the frame we chose that keyframe to be at. So let me just select all this stuff, hit U. So yeah, at 6:05, everything starts to fade out. So what I'll do actually is I don't want to scale everything individually, so I'll just use a null. So I will right click somewhere, new null object, and I'll call this scale null. But actually what happens is everything shrinks, but the button in the middle shrinks at a faster rate, kind of. And so I figured the best way to simulate that is if I just went to, I think it was, yeah, at the same rate. So 6:05, I'll go to the button and then hit the scale again. And I don't want it to be too exaggerated because like it's in all the UI for The Last of Us, it's very like tame. There's not like shit doesn't bounce everywhere. And so I'll key it, go forward 10 frames, and then key the scale again, but I'll bring it in not from 90 to 0, but 90 to like 50. And so the reason why is because like obviously it just looks weird in that it stops at a certain point. But at that same rate, I'm going to go on the scale null. Actually, what I want to do is parent everything to the scale null first, except for the background. So I'll select all that, and then I want the parent to be scale null. So now I'll hit S on the scale null and hit the scale, go forward 10 frames at the same rate that we just did the button at, key it again, and I'll set this to 0. But I do want to ease this one, so it's kind of like a very smooth thing. And it'll be eased out. So I will exaggerate that like we had before, so it should... Also, I think I'll do the opacity on the button. So let me go to the button and the opacity. I'll go from 90 to about, yeah, let's do 0. 90 to 0, how about that? So it goes bam, bam. And that is that. That's pretty much the whole animation. That's all there is to it. And Naughty Dog, if you're listening, hit me up. I just did that for free. Imagine what I could do for $5.